The Mayo Experience.
That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience. Week 11 Waiver Wire adds the Week 10 injury report, some running back snaps, a look ahead to Monday Night Football, and everything in between to get you ready for your fantasy football week. Joining me on the program in just a second is going to be Sal Vetri. But first, I need to tell everyone out there, and thanks for tuning in live like we are every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. But if you want to get into a draw for 20 DK bucks, easy way to do so. Smash the like button for the episode. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section. Tell me your favorite waiver wire pickup for Week 11. The other way to do so, that audio podcast, the Pat Mayo Experience. You subscribe to that, you download the episodes, you leave a 5-star review, your DraftKings handle, something you like about the show, and boom, you too will be in the draw for 20 DK bucks. If you want to find all of the waiver wire pickups, which do get changed throughout the week once injuries happen, we'll get to that when we get to running back here momentarily, because some news could drastically shift what happens in the running back rankings, moving number 2 to number 1 or number 1 to number 2. We'll see. But those change after Monday Night Football, and then again Tuesday morning, and then again Tuesday evening. Every time there is news after Monday Night Football, I'll update the rankings so you are prepared for your waivers come Tuesday evening to submit those claims. The winners of the 20 DK dollars from last week, we have MD The Dream, Monroe Da Kitty, Lathla 8414 Chances, Glory Hole. I feel like that's like 2 and 3 weeks for Glory Hole. Hot move, Glory Hole. You know, getting some lucky glory here. Thomas MR10, Tie Star 243 and 1, Bears fan 1. Coming off a win, too. I mean, at least the Bears. All the winners of 20 DK bucks. Hopefully that will be in your DK accounts later on Monday, maybe early on Tuesday. We'll see how quickly they get up on it. The link for the Pat Mayo Experience DraftKings Open will be added once the link is available to me. So if you just refresh back, you'll find it in the description of this podcast or video, and boom, you can enter $15 to play, no rake, $45,000 of guaranteed money. So go check that out. Let's bring him in right now, Sal Vetri from the Sal Vetri YouTube channel. What's going on, my man?
What's going on, Pat? Yeah, I'm excited to break this down. We just came off of, it was probably the best week in the NFL, like 6 games on yesterday's slate, coming down to the last minute or so. 2 teams losing on a field goal. Pretty good slate. Excited to break that down and look ahead as well.
Yeah, it was fun. Like you said, a few teams lose by a field goal. There was a bunch of 1-7 teams that end up getting the victory. It's funny, everyone's kind of like writing off the Patriots are terrible. They lost to the Ravens a week ago. And then they go on bye week, and then a whole bunch of one-win teams. I almost said one-team wins. One-win teams. It's a rough Monday here. I know it's Monday afternoon, but I was questionable all morning for this show with a severe back injury. I felt like Matt Stafford out here. So the drugs are hitting me right now, the back medication drugs. But what was the single biggest thing that you noticed from week 10, whether it be like a running back share that you were just kind of surprised about? Was it Kareem Hunt getting so much run against the Bills for Cleveland, even though Nick Chubb stayed on the field almost the entire time? What stood out to you the most?
Yeah, individual players. The Kareem Hunt thing I wanted to see all week, thinking he would get the percentage of the snaps he got, I thought was definitely high. I was thinking 30 or 40%, but they played on the field a lot together. So that was probably one of the things I wasn't foreseeing. So that definitely stood out. Literally right before lock, we see that LaShawn McCoy gets ruled out for a healthy scratch. And the early news is that they want to rest him and save him for the playoffs, like this is the NBA. So that's interesting. Damian Williams goes out, sees 24 touches. So some of the running back things stood out in that regard. And then really talking about Damian Williams, that Chiefs game in general was the one that probably stood out the most on the entire slate for me, although there was a lot of really good finishes.
Let's talk about Kareem Hunt for a second. It came out on Monday morning that Antonio Callaway had been benched for disciplinary reasons. So let's say he's active and actually involved in the Browns game plan on Thursday night. And maybe he lost his job because of this. But a lot of it was Kareem Hunt. Yes, he was lining up in the backfield a bit. But if you look at the snap shares for Cleveland, Chubb played 81% of the snaps. Kareem Hunt played 54% of the snaps. A lot of those were out of the slot where normally, or even out wide at receiver, where normally you would see Antonio Callaway. If Callaway is back, would you expect Hunt to play so much?
Yeah, you probably see a little bit of a kick down, but I think that the way they were running it was you did see Hunt in the slot, a couple of wide receiver screens on the outside set up for him. I mean, he caught 7 balls in this game, but there were times where they had both running backs in the backfield. They had Hunt coming in motion on some plays. So I don't think you'll see that drastic of an overlap of it. They're kind of down some personnel, like you mentioned, with Callaway disciplinary reasons. But I do think this is a spot where they were playing Dontrell Hilliard 40% of the snaps the last 2 weeks before this. I think you could see 45% of the snaps for Hunt moving forward and sort of a 10 to 15% overlap with him on the field. I mean, you saw 9 targets. They wanted to use him, get him involved. I don't think they just dump him from the game plan. If Callaway comes back, which, if anything, Callaway's been the guy that nonstop this entire season, getting suspended now twice. It's not really a guy I don't think they want to run the offense around.
Yeah, so anyone who was concerned about Nick Chubb, 81% of the snaps should clear that up a little bit. Maybe he doesn't hit those heights once again, but as long as he's seeing at least a 70% snap share of the Browns' backfield, should be good to go as an impact fantasy player. And although he didn't get into the end zone, as someone who rostered a lot of Nick Chubb on DraftKings this week, he had about 38 million chances to score from the 1-yard line and never got in.
Yeah, he had six attempts from inside the 2-yard line. And then the one that probably killed me the most, because I had some Chubb. I have him in one of my biggest just season-long leagues dating back for years now. And he had a shuffle pass that was just more so dropped by him that more times than not, it's just one of those walk-in 1-yard touchdowns behind 2 blockers for a running back. So not only can he not get in on 6 1-yard rushes, he can't even get in and catch a shuffle pass, which is, 6 inches of a pass. So, brutal red zones twice. That was 2 separate drives for Cleveland in that game.
If you want to see the full running back snap shares from week 10, you can check out my article up on dkplaybook.com right now. If you want to see that, or you can just go to Instagram at the PME, and there's another giveaway associated with that. You follow me on Instagram at the PME. You see a sports photo pop up there. You give it a quick heart, leave your DraftKings handle as a comment, and you'll be in that draw for 20 DK bucks, and you get info along with it too. And this isn't even like Pat poorly analyzes info that's there. This is just straight info, so you can do with whatever you want with it. But these are the numbers that came out for the snap shares. There was a lot of guys that played a bunch of snaps in week 10, over like 75%. I think the most hilarious one is Kalen Ballage, played 82% of the snaps. I know that we talked about him a little bit last week, but he did nothing with all these snaps and all these touches. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, he had 20 overall touches on the ground. And I think I was on the podcast last week saying that I don't think Ballage is a guy that they want to just go out there, and they've been so hesitant to even give him half the work, let alone 80%. But I guess we can also analyze it the other way, that they haven't even had Gaskin or Layard active for any of these weeks anyways. So I don't think they have confidence in those guys. So yeah, getting 80% of the snaps, seeing good volume, but doing nothing with it, as we've seen all season long. Maybe this week we start to see sort of a little bit of a pivot to these other guys behind him.
Let's talk about the Pat Mayo Experience Listeners League just for 1 minute here before we get into the pickups and we get into the injuries. Do you think you can guess the winning lineup this week? It scored 223.24 points. Good for 5K.
Yeah, we'll try it out. We'll try it out again. I think this week was probably a little less concentrated. A bunch of players. Quarterback, I feel like, is between 2 ways, but I'll go with Lamar Jackson.
No. Patrick Mahomes is the starting quarterback in this lineup.
That's what I was going to say is the other one. I think they scored very even, like in the low 30s each. Okay, so Patty Mahomes, Derrick Henry.
No Derrick Henry on this team either. Yeah.
Big over 2. Christian McCaffrey.
No Christian McCaffrey in this lineup. It's really bizarre. Like when you look at it, it's all the other big guys that kind of went off, but only 2 players in this lineup: a 5.1% Darius Slayton, who scored 37.1 points, and a 5.4% Aaron Jones, who scored 27.3 points. Because we always talk about like ownership. Beyond those guys who were in the single digits, the next lowest owned player in this lineup was Patrick Mahomes at 14.3%. Very chalky lineup, just 2 little swerves off, and boom, you're in the money. So it's Mahomes, David Montgomery, and Aaron Jones as the running backs. Chris Godwin, Tyreek Hill, Christian Kirk as the receivers, Darius Slayton as the flex, Mike Gesicki as the tight end, good for equality, 4.8 points. You can still win even with a dud in your lineup. That's what these smaller contests allow you to do. And then the Steelers D, good for 25 points at 17.8% ownership at a cheap price. And there you have it, a quick $5,000 in your account if you played in the Pat Mayo Experience Open.
Well, yeah, that stands out to me too, because yeah, like you said, I mean, you don't always have to just go far off the board. He had a couple of plays that banked really big with Slayton and Aaron Jones. But the thing that stood out is Gesicki was like one of the only punt tight ends that doesn't score close to 10 fantasy points. You had Doyle down there, Olsen, even I think Red Ellison outscores him. So surprising that nobody else can kind of make it through with maybe twice as many fantasy points from a tight end. But yeah, nice lineup overall. Slayton was the big one.
Well, it's funny, like when we talk about avoiding chalk, clearly you don't need to because this guy won with a bunch of chalk in his lineup. So shout out Bobby Miller, 8-2, his third of 3 lineups. He maxed it out, so good thing he did it this week. He spent the $45 instead of the $15 to get those 3 entries in. It severely paid off this week. But the super duper chalky guys from the slate this week, like no Michael Thomas in this lineup, although that would have been really good chalk because he scored beaucoup of points here. But Chris Godwin, 28% ownership, only 13 points. David Montgomery, 55% ownership, 6 points. Mike Gesicki, 27% ownership, 4.8 points. Now, the other really good chalk in this lineup was Christian Kirk, 33%. Obviously, he was a slate breaker. You needed to have Christian Kirk at his price point in your lineup, just probably like you needed to have Slayton as well. But sometimes just if you fade, like there was very few people this week, myself included, that have been like, you know what? I'm going to fade the David Montgomery chalk. I was good with fading the Ronald Jones chalk. Not a great move for his price point. I was good with fading the Devin Singletary chalk. Turned out to be a pretty good move. But when it came to looking at this game, the Lions' run defense, how the Bears have been rolling, at least lately, and then especially when Matt Stafford got declared inactive at the last minute, being like, oh, this is going to be all running all the time for David Montgomery. This is not great news for his future prospects.
No, not at all. And yeah, I am with you on the David Montgomery train. He was my most owned running back of the week, the guy I liked the most all week long. His ownership coming up in it. Yeah, the Pat Mayo experience, that open or the tournament there, that definitely has sharp people in it. I mean, it was 20% higher ownership on him there than a lot of other contests around the industry. So people were on it. It was, in my opinion, a good move because, like you said, no Stafford. And there was 3 to 4 players, 2 ruled out, 2 playing banged up on the Detroit defensive line that's been awful all season long, just injured. So it was a good spot, and he just absolutely lays an egg. Just no rushing touchdowns, which he needs there, and no receptions in the game. So brutal spot for him in the week. Yeah, not great overall. And Gesicki getting up there in 20% ownership, I thought was surprising for the week overall.
Yeah, I mean, 27 up here right now. And like Rhett Ellison in the contest was 18% ownership. We talked a lot about this I talked about it on the Friday show, then I spoke about it again on the Sunday morning live show, that there were enough cheap, like, I forget who it was, someone on Twitter asked me about it. Because I spoke about it with Levitan on last week's DraftKings show as well, that the chalky cheap tight end or the chalky cheap receiver is always a good fade spot. Just because they're, like, it's not to say that they can't score a bunch of points, and if they do score a bunch of points, you're absolutely buried. But I would like to go back and look to see who, like, the $3,400 tight end is that is, over 15% owned in one of these large contests that actually came through on value. It seems like close to 90% of the time, you're better off just not taking them.
Yeah, more times than not, they have a bad quarterback throwing them the ball. And when they start to get high in ownership, in that 3K range, and even this week we had Rhett Ellison, when it's just so cheap, you're banking on a touchdown. Like, they'll probably project out or just score 6 or 7 fantasy points, 3 catches for 30, 40 yards like Ellison did this weekend. Whoever falls into the end zone, which happened to be Doyle this weekend, is the better play in that range. So once they start getting chalky, you're just banking on touchdowns, which is so variant that you might as well go ahead and fade it. 20% in some of these contests. You said 27%. I thought that was crazy for Gesicki, who had his only good game ever.
Yeah, and then first catch of the game puts the ball on the ground for the Dolphins.
Yeah, fumbles that one away. Ended up catching some balls later in the drives, but nowhere near enough for the production and at that ownership to really pay it off.
Yeah, I think you hit on this properly, where you're really banking on a touchdown for them to exceed full value. Like, and listen, you didn't need to fade them, and maybe the price savings is what it is. Like, there's a big difference between Rhett Ellison at $2,500. Like, getting that extra $600 worth of savings this week, if it allowed you to get up to another position and that guy goes off, then the trade-off is probably worth it. But there was enough people at $3,100, $3,200, $3,000, $3,500 at tight end that you could get off Gesicki pretty easily and get the same amount of points from it. And then you're eliminating, like, if it's going to be 27% and all the other guys are 5%, well, does that one guy have almost 6 times better of a chance of catching a touchdown than the other ones? The answer is no. So that is a spot where you definitely do want to look the other way almost every time. The Ellison one is different just because he was so cheap. It'd be like using the $1,500 defense on the week, just what that allows you to do in the rest of your lineup. I more or less understand that, because even looking at it, like number 1 and number 2 in the contest, they're tight ends were Gesicki and Rhett Ellison. So it didn't end up making a difference. Maybe those extra savings got them up to the players that they need. But the only 2 common players in those lineups were Slayton and Christian Kirk. You could figure it out all the other ways if you wanted to, because the second place lineup is the one that you're talking about. Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown, Christian McCaffrey, Michael Thomas, Rhett Ellison, Darius Slayton. It only took like the 1 or 2 low-owned guys, and that's all it was.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you would have probably seen more weeks than not a guy like Tyreek Hill, who one of the best games I've ever seen him play, if not the best, just pop off this week as well. But since his price tag was up there, you ended up getting the guys who score just as many fantasy points for 5,200 in Kirk and well below that price tag in Slayton. So it allows you to pay up at other spots. So yeah, it was an interesting week with some of those lower end wide receivers. And it seems like every week that happens, somebody's going to just pop off, and two of them did this week.
Let's just talk briefly a little bit more about week 10. The one note that I had is I've been just horrendous gambling the past 3 weeks. Pretty decent Sunday for me, actually, because the Bears came through. I got a push in the Browns game, so I got my money back. Winning week for me, so first one in a while. But when you're on a bad betting streak, you always just anticipate the worst happening. And with the Bears up 20-13, because they had missed that extra point a little bit earlier on, that I was convinced that the Lions were going to come back and somehow tie that game. Even when I saw the penalty flag thrown on the final play of the game, I was just like, oh God, there's going to be pass interference in the end zone. This is horrible news. Turns out Driscoll just threw it past the line of scrimmage. And when you're watching the game without sound, it's one of like 5 TVs on. You're like, it almost makes the viewing experience a bit more intense, because like immediately, like when I watched the replay, like the quick game this morning when I went through it again, that they immediately said, oh, he's past the line of scrimmage. When you're watching it without sound, you don't know that. You're like, oh God, what's happening? It really ratchets it up just a little bit. But there was a drive in that game when the Bears scored their first touchdown that they basically ran the same play like 6 times in a row. It was just throw over the middle for 12 yards to guy who was standing completely wide open. It really did help Mitch Trubisky, but that may have been one of the worst games I think I've actually like sat down and watched almost from end to end. The Browns-Bills game was pretty close as well, but bad game overall, man.
Yeah. I thought that game was bad as well. I mean, there was no points being scored. It was like 6-0 somehow. Detroit about to go into the half. There's a turnover, and then you see a point scored off of it, makes it 7-6 before the half. And then right at the second half, you see the 2 quick touchdowns for the Bears. And they pretty much do nothing after that. They score again off of a turnover to get their 3rd touchdown. But there was really not much there. I mean, in a game where Trubisky throws 3 touchdowns, and he's throwing 3 touchdowns, I think, on 3 consecutive drives, you're like, oh, what is this guy's stats going to be? He's going to be winning tournaments. He had like 100 and middling yards, 140 yards, and the 3 touchdowns. They don't really do much on the ground. Montgomery burns a lot of people at 60 yards. And you have just Jeff Driscoll, a highlight reel, is throwing to himself probably in that game, other than just interceptions. So, and also, I mean, he did have one really nice throw, a nice adjustment, maybe a push off by Kenny Galladay in the end zone. But those 3 or 4 plays that I said are like the only thing you could take from this game. If that's all you saw, you would know it would happen.
If Stafford is out moving forward, do you think it's going to be okay? Because this is still a really tough passing situation for Jeff Driscoll, who I don't think he'd topped 180 yards once in his career before yesterday's game. And one of those was the long, there's a bunch of garbage time, then coming back at the end and the long throw to Galladay as well to get him over that number. But do you think that Galladay is going to see a significant step down? Because it did seem like when Driscoll dropped back and he was going to throw, he just had eyes for Galladay.
Yeah, he had eyes for Galladay and Jones to an extent, which he probably should. But it's definitely going to be a drop back, in my opinion, just in terms of keeping drives alive. I mean, it took sort of a Hail Mary type of throw to end, maybe even a push off to get Galladay some sort of fantasy production in the end zone on that big play. So there's going to be a drop off just from Stafford to him. And this Lions offense in general, you're down maybe your top 2 running backs now with Ty Johnson leaving that game, I believe, with a concussion. And now your quarterback, it's just really tough to even win games, keep drives alive. This was one that they really had 6-0 going into the half, and it just got away from them in the 3rd quarter. Had it down the stretch, like you said, goes over the line of scrimmage, incomplete anyways. But a game that's probably you take positives away if you're the Lions, and if you're the Bears, you just are happy you got out of there with a victory.
Let's jump into the running backs. We'll start with the injury report. Saquon Barkley, I just have a bunch of question marks next to his name. They're going on bye next week, but I don't know if he's actually hurt or they're just saying he's hurt to excuse his 1 yard of rushing. That's not great, as I hear. Devonta Freeman left the game with a foot injury. He's getting an MRI on Monday, so he kind of hinges on who the best running back pickup of the week is. Gio Bernard exited the game. He is questionable for week 11. Jordan Wilkins exited for the Indianapolis Colts, and that was an interesting snap share with the Colts down the entire time. Hines and Mack almost split snaps for the Colts yesterday, which was kind of odd. You mentioned Ty Johnson left the game with a concussion. No word on him yet. Mark Walton still suspended. Darius Geis expected to return this week. James Conner has a shoulder injury, missed the week, but is expected to play on Thursday night. That's what Mike Tomlin said on Monday, that he would have practiced in full on Monday if the Steelers practiced on Monday. These Monday injury reports for Thursday games are just absolute nonsense. You can just make up whatever you want and say it. Benny Snell, no word on him yet. Chase Edmonds, expect him to be out a little bit longer. Ito Smith placed on injured reserve for the Falcons, and Chris Thompson may return this week against the Jets. He's been out for a while, but as it stands right now, for the running back pickups of the week, I actually put J.D. McKissic at number 1 against Dallas. His pass-catching prowess can really come through. I do worry that we get into a situation where maybe they sign Jay Ajayi, they pick someone up off the street. But he did play over 70% of the snaps yesterday in the absence of Ty Johnson, which I thought was somewhat intriguing. Paul Perkins played 18% of the snaps. So unless they get someone else, I can still see it being maybe not 70% McKissic, but 60% McKissic, and he's going to be their pass catcher. I like that. However, if Devonta Freeman's actually out for a bit, Brian Hill is the pickup. Brian Hill might be the pickup anyway, but I think it's between those two guys of who you want. McKissic might be better this week in particular if Johnson sits, but for the long term, if Freeman is out, Brian Hill's someone you're going to want to have.
Yeah, those are the two that I have above on the top of my list right now. We'll see what happens with Freeman. Hill played over 50% of the snaps, pretty much got all the work once Freeman left that game. Hill was a guy that they wanted to see what they had in the preseason. After last season, the end of the year, last 2 games, he got some run and performed pretty well. They have confidence in him in terms of giving him the ball. So I like Brian Hill a little bit more, but like you said, it's a toss-up. We'll see what happens with the Ty Johnson injury. We know Kerryon's not going to return. And 6 receptions this past week for J.D. McKissic on 7 targets. And then the week before, he was outgaining Ty Johnson on about half the touches. So he's been very productive. You have to see what this whole entire Lions offense overall looks like. But if anything, you say Jeff Driscoll being in the game maybe another week or 2 should also help the pass-catching role for McKissic. So short-term McKissic, we'll see what happens with Devonta Freeman. Those are the 2 top guys I have on here. If for some reason you have Damian Williams on your waiver wire, because a lot of people are probably frustrated with him, I do think it's a spot where if they're going to keep healthy scratching McCoy, and we don't know, maybe they get him right back. Maybe that's all he needed for rest, but it's at least worth holding on to if you really just need a stash or the waivers go by and he's still there on a waiver wire.
If Damian Williams was available in this player pool, he's still owned in more than 60% of the league, so he doesn't qualify for this list. I would have him at number 1.
Yeah, that makes sense then. Exactly. That's what I figured. Same can be said for like guys like Joe Mixon. If anybody ever dropped these guys, and Joe Mixon had 30 rushing attempts as his team was just trailing the entire game. They don't care at all in Cincinnati right now what's going on.
No, and Gio Bernard got injured in this game, so he has a knee sprain. He may miss the next week, maybe next couple weeks. So it's going to be all Joe Mixon going forward.
Yeah, exactly. So if those 2 guys who are really disappointing a lot of people, maybe they're not on the waivers. But it's a potential spot where they can help you later in the season, or you just sell high on these guys after 1 week and don't try and ride the roller coaster for the next 5 or 6 weeks.
So the rest of the list after McKissic and Hill, it then gets kind of cloudy. I have Darius Geis. I have Kalen Ballage. I have no expectations for either of those 2. Adrian Peterson's been dropped in enough leagues that he's down there. What do you think happens with Darius Geis and Adrian Peterson? Like, it's a bad matchup against the Jets this week, for one thing. The run defense is really the only thing that they do well. We saw that with Saquon Barkley. Frank Gore's also been put below the threshold. He only played 33% of the snaps this week to Devin Singletary's 67. And then Chris Thompson might return off just from being injured the past few weeks as well. So would you rather own Geis, Peterson, or Thompson? For me, obviously, you can see my rankings, I'd go Geis, Peterson, and Thompson. I think that's open for debate, though, because, Peterson's just been used. Peterson has looked good. Callahan might say, you know what? We're an old school running team. We'll run the ball 85 times a game if we want to. And lose, but we'll still do it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if I own Adrian Peterson right now, I'm probably not dropping him to pick up Darius Geis. But if you don't own him and you just need a spot to pick somebody up, I think Geis is a guy who there's a lot of question marks around, but definitely upside in him, a younger player. We talked about this a couple weeks back, I think, but like Adrian Peterson's been fantastic. He's running behind an offensive line that's actually top 5 in run protection and run blocking over the last month of the season. So he's not only breaking tackles, he looks young, like he's looking good out there, but it's the end of the season and Darius Geis is returning. So maybe you just give him more work overall. That being said, if I own Adrian Peterson, I'm probably not dropping him for Geis. It's just a tricky situation. So just based on that kind of analysis, I'd probably have Adrian Peterson slightly over Geis, but there's some upside for sure in him. You just, at the end of the day, it's probably going to cloudy the waters, really, especially if Thompson comes back and all these guys, it's going to be hard to rely on any of them.
Yeah, and we don't even know who's starting at quarterback. I assume it's Dwayne Haskins, although Case Keenum might be unconcussed enough to start against the Jets this week. We'll see. But, this offense hasn't scored a touchdown in like 4 games or whatever the hell it is right now. I think it's like 11 quarters or something like that. So the fantasy upside of any of these guys just isn't very good.
Yeah, the whole environment right now in Washington is terrible. Like, I imagine there's people on this team themselves or even a management that is just hoping these last 6 weeks go and fly by, because this season has been just left and right, whether it's injuries or just looking terrible on both sides of the ball. Maybe they'll back their way into a first overall pick somehow, but everything else has looked pretty bad.
The handcuff selections for the week, I have Alexander Madison at number 1. Not only is he, I wouldn't say he's usable on a week-to-week basis, but he does things on a week-to-week basis, which is nice. And Cook, he would just assume the role of Cook if anything were happening. At least I think so. Pollard, I moved up Gallman a little bit because of this Barkley news, but he is the direct handcuff. I should probably move down Jalen Samuels a little bit, potentially. Reggie Bonifant. The biggest move of the week is I had Darrell Henderson, where I now have Malcolm Brown. We just saw this with Malcolm Brown, where he returned from injury this week, and it had been Henderson. Henderson looked spry. Henderson looked pretty good. Brown had been out as a spell for Todd Gurley, but just looking at the snap share, it was, 74% for Gurley in a game where they were down most of the way. Brown 16%, Henderson 10%. I do think it's still Malcolm Brown who gets first call if anything was to happen to Gurley. It might be more of a split than anything else, maybe a 60-40 split, maybe 70-30, 50-50, whatever it might be. But I do think that Malcolm Brown would be the one out ahead of Henderson in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, out of training camp, he just couldn't beat him out anyways, the rookie in Henderson, and they've liked Brown for a couple of seasons now. But also, like, the time that he was out, you had Henderson in the one game, I think he had like 6 touches, and he looked good. He had 2 big plays in that. But then in the past 2 games, kind of spelling Todd Gurley and even splitting direct work with him prior to this game, he really didn't stand out all that much. So I think they just feel more confident in terms of trusting somebody to carry the ball in some of these games, not fumbling with Malcolm Brown there. So yeah, slightly ahead of him this week in a more pass-friendly script, but even in a game that's a little bit more, and this one was closer to neutral even, in a game even if they're leading big, I think it's still going to be Malcolm Brown getting more work.
Wide receiver injuries from Week 10. Tyler Boyd left the game towards the end with a leg injury. No word yet on how serious that is. Corey Davis missed the week with a hip injury. Ryan Switzer, in that aforementioned Steelers and Rams game, has a back problem. He exited the game. And then you have Paris Campbell, T.Y. Hilton, Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson. Well, Hilton and Campbell's going to be out a couple weeks. Hilton could be back this week. We'll see. Alshon was on bye. He should be back for Week 11. D.D. Westbrook was on bye. He's almost most definitely going to be back for Week 11. Deshaun Jackson, probably not so much. He's probably going to be out another month or so if he comes back at all. Brandon Cooks missed the game. No word yet on whether he'll return this year or not. He could be back next week. He could be out for the year. As we've seen with Sterling Shepard, once you have so many concussions, and even Vernon Davis and Jordan Reed from the Redskins, and they've been dealing with their concussion issues. It's just, you don't know what the timetable is going to be. So keep an eye out for him. Adam Thielen with his hamstring. I doubt that we end up seeing him again in Week 11. Will Fuller could return from his hamstring problem coming out of the bye, but that's no certainty. So he has actually been dropped in a bunch of leagues. Kenny Stills is still available. So if you have bench space, having both of them, if you need a receiver, isn't the worst idea. N'Keal Harry could be activated for the first time this year for the Patriots coming off of bye. Sterling Shepard, no word yet on what's going to happen with him. And AJ Green, he has that ankle problem. It looks like the Bengals are in full tank mode. No idea if he's ever coming back or if he's back next week. Dr. Jesse Morse said on the Friday show when I had him on that he wouldn't be stunned if we didn't see AJ Green at all for the rest of the season. With a contract coming up, just get yourself healthy for next season. Go sign for those big dollars. So overall, for the waiver wire heading into Week 11, D.D. Westbrook has been dropped in enough leagues now that he is owned in less than 60%. So I have him as my number 1 guy, with Nick Foles returning this week at Indianapolis. Devontae Parker number 2, Will Fuller number 3. I think those are the big 3 pickups. And then it's the same old guys as every single week. Pascal, Beasley, Tate, Russell Gage, Dorsett, Kenny Stills, Josh Gordon. If we get word, like, Fuller's still a good pickup either way because he's eventually going to come back. But if he sits, Kenny Stills is probably a better play for this week than a lot of those guys ahead of him, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely the thing with all those wide receivers and whoever just dealing with concussions, definitely good to just stay out on that side of it and wait a little longer, especially AJ Green with his injury. I think it's more so contract stuff, not wanting to just absolutely ruin your career at this point. So you see AJ Green probably not going to be there. So you have the Auden Tate still potentially available, guys like that. I think the guys that you mentioned, if they are dropped, D.D. definitely is kind of a tier of his own up there, and Fuller if he's available in enough leagues. You saw James Washington sort of have a career game, 6 catches, 90 yards, a touchdown, and 7 targets. It's just a matter of how much does that stay up. Juju's going to have his games. Deontay Johnson played decent in that one, so it's not going to be consistent, I wouldn't think. But again, it's worth a shot potentially. I think Russell Gage is an interesting one. So maybe more of like a DraftKings cheaper priced play than a season long. But Hooper's expected to miss some time. Last I saw, he's going to get an MRI, but they're expecting him to miss time. So the middle of the field is now wide open for Russell Gage. There's no Mohamed Sanu, obviously, filling in for him. And now if there's no Hooper, I mean, you're having a guy seeing targets for the past 2 weeks now that they've played. And I think that only increases with Matt Ryan's perplexity to target the middle of the field. Now his 2 top targets gone in a matter of weeks from his team. So I do like that. And then Darius Slayton, the big thing that I was concerned with Slayton was obviously this Giants offense. We'll see what happens with Sterling Shepard. But Darius Slayton, I was only seeing 4.5, 5 targets a week. So sure, he has upside. We saw 14 targets this last week. If something kind of forms there, it was a really good game getting separation. He had good matchups with no Darrell Roberts or Jermaine Johnson in for the Jets, but getting the volume is enough for me to kind of want to go there a little bit more.
Yeah, so I just moved Darius Slayton up, just looking at this right now. I moved to 1 spot behind Josh Gordon. I think a lot of what his productivity for the rest of the season is really based on the health of Evan Ingram and the health of Sterling Shepard. If both those guys come back, Slayton's relegated to a backup role once again. He'll be on the field, but in terms of like when we talk about progressions from Daniel Jones, maybe he does have a connection with Darius Slayton, but I think in the offhand chance that those guys both remain injured, I'll probably put him up behind Russell Gage. I like what you said there. The big thing about Russell Gage as well is if Hooper is out, we just saw a game where they were winning the entire time. Let's not pretend like the Falcons are a good team. I don't think all of a sudden they're just going to rattle off 7 games and win towards the end of the year. If they're going to continue to be trailing in a lot of these games, and you're going to see a lot more opportunity for market share and overall volume for Russell Gage as well. So that's something that I would really focus on.
Yeah, exactly. And even in the game where they were leading, he still sees 5 targets, and then he saw 7 targets the week before. So he's probably more times than not going to be touchdown dependent for him to really make an impact in your lineup. But if he's getting you PPR format wise, like 11 to 12 points, and he's on your waiver wires, it could be worth it with another 16 bye coming up and then a couple more bye weeks after that.
Oh God, there's another 16 bye coming up. Is that next week?
I could be potentially wrong on that, but I remember when I was looking ahead like 2 or 3 weeks ago, seeing the 2 6 teams. I wrote them down in my sheet right here, but I'll look.
Oh, God. Yeah. So bye weeks for the upcoming week, Green Bay, Tennessee, the Giants, and Seattle. So, yeah, maybe it is week 12. Could be another massive one. You think they just distribute these a bit more evenly? Like, do we really need the 2-team bye weeks?
Yeah, I know, right? And the 2-team bye weeks come at weird times. Like week 8, after they already had a couple of 4-team bye weeks, they go back to 2-team. But no, all right. So week 10 was the only 16. 11 and 12 are 4, and then they're done.
Okay. You have no idea how much time it saves me when I do these articles and rankings every single week when there are no bye weeks. And like, there's always one guy across the rankings who always gets like left in, even though he's on bye week, just because I missed the name. It sucks.
That's funny. It's a complete opposite for me in terms of like doing like game by game notes or something. It's so much easier when there's 6 teams off the slate, or at least on average like 2 to 4.
Yeah, when you do the individual game write-ups, of course, it's just gonna the fewer amount of games, then all of a sudden the less writing you have to do. But I have my like ranking sheet from week to week to week, and you have to move players in, players out, move them back in, and then by just osmosis, there's 1 or 2 guys that just get. It's usually like guys at the very, very low end, like backups, because I try to rank as many players as possible who could potentially see players in games. Just funny how content-wise that ends up working out.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that both ways it kind of tilts back and forth for each of us. But yeah, I think I think so far we just got 2 more 4-team buys, and then we're completely done until the smaller slates in the playoffs come around.
Tight ends. We got some injuries. Not that tight end was good to begin with, but it is becoming dark at tight end right now. George Kittle, doubtful for Monday Night Football. He could still technically go, but I have him questionable for Week 11. Evan Ingram missed Week 10. No word yet on whether or not he'll be able to play coming out of the Giants bye week in Week 12. Austin Hooper, as you mentioned, left the game with a knee injury. He'll get an MRI, but early reports is that it's not good and that he's going to miss multiple weeks. Trey Burton exited the game for the Bears. He is doubtful for Week 11. Then you have Ricky Seals-Jones, Jeff Heuerman, Delaney Walker, Matt Lacoste, Jeff Swaim, and Vernon Davis. Some of those guys were on bye. Some of those guys didn't play, but those were the ones who were nowhere to be found in Week 11 and had an injury designation going in. So pickups at tight end for the week. I have Jack Doyle at number 1 right now, who's seen a pretty incredible market share. While Perry Campbell and T.Y. Hilton are going to be out, and if they continue to be out, then it's going to be a lot of Jack Doyle. Darren Fells, Noah Fant coming off the bye week, O.J. Howard, who rebounded in a big way. Played a lot of snaps. Not only did he play a lot of snaps, played 98% of them, ran routes on a lot of them, which was the big problem earlier in the season. Goddard, Herndon, Ebron, Gesicki, Vance McDonald, Irv Smith. But I think it's like the big four there that you really need to focus on for tight ends.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm a little bit lower on Noah Fant. In terms of like career prowess, I like him a lot. But in that last game, I mean, backup quarterback's still there. I know he had the big play for sure, but Jeff Herman was out. We'll track his status. I haven't actually checked in on Jeff Herman's status if it's going to be long-term or not, but that allowed him to play 80+% of the snaps and then the 75-yard touchdown. But yeah, I mean, it's just a graveyard at tight end now. If Hooper misses, if Kittle's forced to miss more time than just this potential game. So yeah, anything that's there is definitely good. I'm assuming so many people already picked up Gerald Everett from past shows. And is Eric Ebron still below the threshold or above?
He is below the threshold, but it seems like Doyle is the preferred play while all these guys are out.
Yeah, I think he is, and I would have him above him slightly. The only thing with Eric Ebron is, and he had a really weird play where he catches a touchdown, and as he's going to the ground, it's ripped from his hands. Yeah, ripped from his hands, and I don't know if it was technically ruled a fumble. I don't know, but goes for a touchback instead, so a huge swing there. But midweek, he talked to the coach about increasing his role. Again, we don't know how much that actually matters, but he ends up seeing the most targets on the team, I believe. So he's somebody who I think I have like right behind Jack Doyle. Both of those guys are just going to be heavily involved with no Campbell out there and now no T.Y. Hilton for potentially another week or two.
Quarterbacks, the injuries keep piling up. It's the year of the quarterback injury, really. Matt Stafford has his back problem. No word yet, really, on how long that he's going to be out for. He could be back next week. He could be out for the entire season. Back, as I can attest to right now, as someone who can't bend, is not great. Probably hard to play quarterback if you got a back problem. Jacoby Brissett missed week 10, questionable for week 11. Case Keenum had the concussion. He was on a bye week. I think Haskins going to end up starting, but if they flip-flop it midweek, not going to be super stunned. Cam Newton is out for the season, and Nick Foles and his shoulder will be back for week 11, taking over from Minshew Walk. Gardner Minshew, back to the bench, pal, for you. Nick Foles is back in. He's going to shed those glasses, get off the analytics team, wear his contacts, and he'll be fine under center at Indianapolis this week for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the quarterback actual streams for the week, we have Kyle Allen at home against Atlanta. It's a nice matchup. Nick Foles at Indianapolis. Derek Carr at home against Cincinnati. Jeff Driscoll, just because of those rushing stats, like that's he and Ryan Finley both can run the ball, and not the worst matchups in the world. So at home against Dallas for Driscoll, Finley at Oakland, then Brendan Allen at Minnesota. I wouldn't normally put Brendan Allen on, but Minnesota's pass defense sucks.
Yeah, they're bad. I mean, Trey Waynes missed in the last game, but even if he plays, he has not been great at all. Xavier Rhodes has taken a huge step backwards. Yeah, we saw it the last game last night. We don't know if Trey Waynes will be back, but even if he is, not the greatest of spots. So, yeah, I think that's fine to be on there, especially we're going to still have 4 teams on bye. So, yeah, I would put him on there towards the bottom of the list, similar to how you did.
Defenses, we looked ahead for this week, and fortunately, or hopefully, you picked up both the Rams and Steelers last week. The Steelers still just below the threshold right now. They're number 1 Thursday night at the Cleveland Browns. Their defense looks incredible right now. They're attacking. The secondary is amazing. So when you're playing the Browns, that's probably a good thing, unless somehow Nick Chubb can get going and Baker Mayfield doesn't have to pass a whole bunch. But Steelers at Cleveland Thursday night. Jacksonville at home against Indianapolis. This could be a Brian Hoyer game again, but even if it is Jacoby, I would like it less if it was Jacoby Brissett, but if it is Brian Hoyer, fire them up. Oakland at home against Cincinnati, against Ryan Finley. We just saw that he's not great, and Baltimore had 2 defensive touchdowns. Oakland, not a great defense, but could have ample opportunity here. Carolina at home against the Falcons. Dallas at Detroit, the Jets at Washington, and then Washington at home against the Jets would be my streamers for the week. It really falls off a cliff here very quickly for defensive streams in week 11.
Yeah, I like Carolina at home against Atlanta in a divisional game, and we just saw Atlanta play really well, and their defensive line got going, but this Carolina defensive line has been just every single week slowly getting better and better. We saw this past week getting a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers, and Matt Ryan is a guy who will make mistakes when pressured. Has not been pressured as of late, just they're doing very good at chipping him and keeping him upright in terms of their run blocking protection has been a lot worse. So, yeah, it's a spot where I do like Carolina in that spot. And then Oakland against Ryan Finley. Finley is going to throw like 5 or 6 yards downfield at most every single time. So eventually he's going to make a mistake and be rushed. Those are 2 spots that I do like this week for streaming options.
Let's talk Monday Night Football then. Big game. It's going to be a fun game to watch. Probably the best Monday Night Football game I can remember in some time. Was Was it Chiefs Vikings? Was it Chiefs Vikings or was it Rams Vikings? I think that might have been a Thursday night game, not a Monday night game last year. Now, there was a Monday night Chiefs game last year that was awesome, wasn't there?
I just remember the Chiefs and the Rams on Thursday night was like the game of the year with just, I don't know, like 4 defensive touchdowns and like 100 and something points and through 3 quarters.
Well, hopefully this one can live up to it. So we have Seattle at San Francisco. San Francisco is favored by 6 points in this game, as we pointed out earlier, that George Kittle is probably not going to play in this one. Do you have any sort of leans on this game? Because the total right now is 47.5 as well.
Yeah, I think I slightly just lean Seattle getting this many points with who I think is the better quarterback in the game. I would lean there, but once again, just not really interested at this point where the line is in taking a strong stance on either side. It's a spot where I do want to lean Seattle. As road underdogs, it's scary because I think they get going the best by running the ball. So if they fall behind early, it's a really difficult spot for, even though they have talented receivers, really difficult spot for all of them against the secondary of the 49ers.
Yeah, it's funny when we think about like the Niners and what they want to do on the ground, especially like you mentioned. If you look at some of the props for this game and rushing attempts, they won't even put the San Francisco players on the board for this because they have no idea how that's going to go. Only Chris Carson shows up as a prop for rushing attempts. He's 17.5 for rushing attempts. And then if you look at rushing and receiving yards, then you can start getting access to the San Francisco backfield. Carson's over under combined yards for the Monday night game, 96.5. Matt Breida, 59.5. Tevin Coleman, 65.5. Any of those stick out to you?
Yeah, Matt Breida, if anything, just because I think the last couple of weeks his snap count has been less than it should because he's had to come out for like a series or two due to injuries, but there's a good chance that can continue to happen. So Breida always being banged up in there, but that's the only one that stands out a little bit. It's just really tough to get a read on those guys. They're going to have probably, we'll see come lock, but 4 running backs active in the last game. And I mean, you had Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. barely touching the ball or playing any snaps, but still active to potentially do that. Just a really tough spot overall to gauge. I think in a good day, you get Tevin Coleman playing around 55% of the snaps, and that's if Breida is not playing well or injured.
Any receivers in this game you particularly like? Since Emmanuel Sanders has joined the 49ers, it's basically been him and him only. But now without Kittle around to soak up like 10 targets a game, does that just mean more for Sanders, or does that finally allow like a Dante Pettis or a Debo to finally break out?
Yeah, so it's definitely Sanders above all, sort of the obvious one there. I mean, he's ran 15 or more routes than any wide receiver since last week, and then 17 more routes than any wide receiver since joining the team 2 weeks ago. On the slate, he has by far just the best matchup individually for a receiver or tight end. He's going to get Jamar Taylor in the slot, who's been pretty poor so far this year for Seattle. And you just have really good secondary play for San Fran or against some of these San Fran wide receivers in terms of you're going to have Shaq Griffin potentially on a guy on the outside like Deebo Samuel, who's a rookie. That's a terrible matchup. Dante Pettis has been running out of the slot before Sanders got there. So now that he's going to move to the outside, he's just going to be splitting those snaps with Kendrick Bourne. So in terms of showdown slates, Kendrick Bourne's like half the price, if not less, than a guy like Dante Pettis. And they're running the same amount of routes because they're just filling in for each other's routes, about 20 each, 22 each. So I actually prefer Kendrick Bourne. I don't know what his props are if he has any, but if you're talking showdown, I don't like him on this slate. But if you're going to pick one of those guys, I'd rather just punt all the way down for him.
Well, we'll discuss Showdown here in a minute. No, he does not have anything. The big one here that could impact what happens in the backfield, whether it be rushing or whether it be receiving, probably more in the receiving game. Kyle Juszczyk is back for the first time in 5 weeks in this game. His over-under receiving prop, 10.5 yards. That's kind of intriguing to me.
Yeah, so that's just in the receiving game. That is a little bit intriguing because, look, so the Patriots, they lost James Devlin, but then the 49ers are right there for the team that runs the most 21 personnel, so just a fullback on the field. I would expect him to have at least probably 2 targets in this game, so it's just a matter of can he bring in one of those, and if he brings in both, he probably hits it for you. So he's a guy that's heavily used in the offense, not only to block, but, I mean, we know for passing and rushing, so it just muddies the waters even more for the running backs in the rushing game. But, yeah, 10.5 seems like something I would take a shot on or somewhat of a stance on. Definitely like the over more.
So he's played in 3 games so far this season. He has at least 2 targets in each of those games. He's averaging 2 catches per game, and he's gone over that number twice. He had 20 yards against the Browns in week 3. He had only 5 yards against the Bengals in week 2, but they won that game 41-17. And then against the Steelers, he had 51 yards receiving. So I think that might be my prop of the night. Kyle Juszczyk over 10.5 yards receiving.
Yeah, that's like a crazy one because you're literally just hoping for even a target in the game. So you're just sitting there. But yeah, I mean, more times than not, they do have design plays like fullback screens in this offense for him. So yeah, it's a fun one to do in low overall yardage on that. So you just need one play.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you can get the one catch, you hope it's good enough because they use them on wheel routes down the sidelines as well. That it's just going to take one, you'd hope.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I'll end up taking. And yeah, I see just in general, like looking at some of the props on here, like that's one that stands out. Yeah, you nailed it with all those 49ers running backs. Like they're so hard to choose between. Breida would be the guy that I think has the most upside for where they have his prop at. So aside from Juszczyk, that backfield, that's probably where I go.
DK Showdown for the Monday night game. Again, Seattle at San Francisco. Russell Wilson's the most expensive player on the slate. Garoppolo is second, then Lockett, then Sanders, and the injured George Kittle. So you probably don't want to use him. What do you think is the move here for building your Showdown rosters?
Yeah, this is extremely difficult because we've never had this season, or since I can remember, two $11,000 quarterbacks. So it pretty much makes it, you can feel really comfortable that both of them are not going to be needed at their price tags, let alone maybe even one of them. So if I'm going with a quarterback, I'm not going for the captain spot, but I would go Russell Wilson just because of the mobile upside. He's a 6.5 point underdog. You factor in more pass attempts, but then you take into account the matchup for his individual receivers and himself, and it's brutal. So I currently lean not to even play a quarterback at all, which only works out like 15% of the time. But when you factor in context to this slate, it seems very likely that it should work out more times than not, that you don't need an $11,000 quarterback, and they're both not in the greatest of spots for their game flows or matchups. So I think the move for me is just not play a quarterback and you save a ton of money automatically. And then Ross Dwelly filling in for a George Kittle last week. He ran 35 routes. He ran 22 routes, but he played on all the snaps once Kittle went down, and Kittle ran 23 routes in that game. So I have him projected right now in this game to run 31 routes, which is just fantastic for a $2,000 player in a beneficial matchup against Seattle secondary.
So Dwelly is $3,000 right now. That's actually, if he's a captain, he's actually $2,000 as an overall. Do you think that Juszczyk returning takes away the number of routes that he runs?
I think it could hurt him a little bit in terms of just the formations that they go in, but not overall, because we've seen Juszczyk. I think Dwelly's just going to take over the George Kittle role, which if that's the case, it really wouldn't impact, and that's what he did last week. It really wouldn't impact much of him as much as like a Dante Pettis, or really Dante Pettis and Kendrick Bourne on the outside. I think what happens more here is if they run 21 personnel, so no slot wide receiver, you have Emmanuel Sanders move to the outside, and then you'll have Deebo Samuel on the outside, and it just absolutely kills what you get out of Dante Pettis at his price tag, and it makes even $1,000 Kendrick Bourne very thin. So I think it's actually okay for Dwelly here. I think the ones that probably benefit or take the biggest hit is really Dante Pettis on the outside and Kendrick Bourne.
Jacob Hollister was a hot pickup this week heading into season-long fantasy leagues. He's $4,600 on DraftKings for the Showdown contest, but Luke Wilson's expected to play. However, Ed Dixon's also expected to return. He's not even in the player pool for the Monday Night Showdown contest right now, so he's definitely scoring a touchdown at some point since no one can use him. Do you worry about someone like Hollister now that they'll have 3 tight ends active on this roster?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, it was really nice to see Hollister run 35 routes to Wilson's 5 last week, and I think he'll still be the primary guy, but he's also priced up. Like, he's $4,600. He's around Deebo Samuel in price tag, which for Samuel's matchup, it's okay to compare the two of them, honestly. But Hollister, if there wasn't going to be any Ed Dixon, I'd have a little bit more upside in him. Ed Dixon kind of comes in. Maybe he plays 25-30% of the snaps off this injury, which really hits Hollister's numbers. So at $4,600 on this type of a slate where there's really no players in the $6,000 range aside from Matt Breida, there's no players in the $5,000 range. So if you just land on him, I think it's okay. But I probably don't get there all that much. I'm probably just going to pay all the way down for a guy like Dwelly or one of those cheaper San Fran wide receivers, and then kind of just build it sort of Starsy and Scrubsy.
That's pretty interesting. I want to give a shout out to, guess who? Colin Drew from DailyRoto.com. He won $120K on the Sunday Night Showdown contest.
Does that guy win every single week of Showdown?
Well, the thing is, I had him on 2 weeks ago on the show, and he had won the week before on a Showdown contest, but he hadn't won in 2 weeks, so he was more than overdue to win. I believe this is now his 14th Showdown DraftKings GPP win. So if people out there want to get the access to tools that Cullen actually uses, dailyroto.com, if you use the promo code the PME, you'll get yourself a discount off that. It's a proven winner. I'm not going to lie to you. If you can figure out how to use the tools as well as Cullen has, you can be printing money, because that at this point, it's not an anomaly. He wins basically once every 4 weeks.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Like, I was pretty positive I saw him win sometime in the past month. So 2 weeks ago, that makes sense. Yeah, that's nuts. I mean, yeah, if you're winning 14 times Showdown slates, look, they're so variant, and just like in terms of the way that he's winning, it's clearly like through the tool and the optimizer entering so many of those lineups. So yeah, for the people that like just say out there, oh, he's entering so many lineups, he can end up winning it. It's not anywhere near that easy. But the fact that he's winning that many times, there's something to it, something methods to the madness of that tool. So yeah, that's pretty wild. That's incredible. 14 showdown victories.
Yeah, I think it's funny. People are just like, wow, if you play 150 lineups, of course you're going to win. If you were for sure going to win, if you played 150 lineups and the first prize is $120,000 or $100,000 in the showdown contest, why wouldn't you just do that and just have $100,000?
Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you take out a $1,000 loan or something like that and turn it into it if you think if you're that confident, or even if you're not that confident, just play one of the lower 50-cent tournaments and end up 150ing that, and you can go ahead and win 5K or something.
Yeah. It turns out that's not actually how it works. You need to put together the puzzle in the proper way, and clearly Colin has figured that out. So maybe we'll have to have him on again. I actually do have a showdown contest strategy session with Colin Drew. If you just search that on the DraftKings YouTube channel or on the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast, Colin goes through like how he constructs his lineups, the detail, how many players from each teams that he uses when he looks at the over-unders, how that affects his selections, how to put people in his player pool, how to take people out of his player pool, and really what to consider. It's very interesting, and he lays it out for you. And if you have he has a huge article up behind the paywall on dailyroto.com. It's a pretty valuable thing, to tell you the truth. Like I mentioned, promo code the PME will get you access to that if you sign up at dailyroto.com. And it's not just football. Basketball has just started. Ricky Sanders, who works over at Daily Roto, won 100K last week. So they're doing well over at Daily Roto. I guess I shouldn't have left, Sal.
I honestly did not know you were there, but yeah, everything seems to be good from that. The showdown thing is still mind-boggling to me, but yeah, I saw Sanders win as well. So congrats to all of them, and definitely, yeah, check all that stuff out. It's pretty cool.
Any love for the San Francisco defense tonight as a fantasy play? Like, if we look at adjusted sack rate, Seattle right now has given up 22 sacks, 7.5 adjusted sack rate. So on Russell Wilson, 7.5% of the time that he drops back to pass, he gets sacked. They just don't pass as much as most teams with bad offensive lines. But as 6-point underdogs, rarely do you see Seattle in the situation that if they do have to pass, let's say 40 times in this game against the league's best attacking defensive line, it could be somewhat problematic. We know that if we can get Russell Wilson up to that point, he will take a lot of sacks. He doesn't turn the ball over much, but he hasn't faced a defense like this yet either.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much I do have interest in them because of their price tag. So they're priced right now at $5,200. And just in terms of like game strategy, where I'm ending up a lot on just looking at stuff early on, is that price range is pretty much Josh Gordon and their defense. And then there's nothing else even around it for the most part. So Gordon at best is going to play like red zone limited snaps. That's not great for his price tag. So I'm ending up on them. It's a variant position, but like you said, really good defensive line versus offensive line matchup. It's tough to bring Russell Wilson to the ground when he scrambles so much. Like, yeah, he might be sacked 4 times. He should probably be sacked 7 times in that game. Doesn't make a ton of mistakes, but if you're relying on just some sort of fumble fluky thing for a touchdown, I actually like it based on where all the pricing is for the slate. A lot of cheap receivers and super difficult matchups, or you can just take a shot on a variant defense that for the most part has been getting a lot of pressure and their secondary has been strong, which usually translates to at least upside in fantasy points.
All right, Sal Vetri, any final thoughts on the week? Mine will be over. Kyle Juszczyk, 10.5 receiving yards for the Monday night game.
What do they have as Ross Dwelly? Do they have a number on his receiving yards?
They do not, I believe. Let's see. Ross Dwelly, nope, he is not on the board.
Okay, that would have been my stance if something was on that. I'll take the over on Matt Breida just because I think that's the most upside in it. I don't feel confident in that, but if he just stays healthy, there's a really good chance he hits that number. So that's probably where I end up on the Monday night slate.
All right, Sal, let everyone know what you got going on this week, where they can find your shows, and what among the myriad sports that you're covering right now.
Yeah, so every single day on the YouTube channel and also stripped into a podcast, the Sal Vetri Show on any of the podcast platforms, is NBA videos and podcast episodes every morning, covering those slates. And then NFL, every single day, there'll be content over on the YouTube channel as well. You can check all that out at my YouTube channel. Just my name, Sal Vetri. And then Twitter is at Sal Vetri DFS.
All right, I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on the Twitter, the Instagrams, and the Facebooks if you're old, at the PME. No shocker there. The link for the Pat Mayo Experience DraftKings Open will appear once I get it in the description of this video or podcast. Can be found on all of the shows during the week as well as, well, I mean, all the football shows. The football link isn't on the golf show. That wouldn't make any sense now. But the updated waiver wire rankings will continue to be updated along with the injury report on DKPlaybook.com. The link to that is also in the description, as is the snap share photos to tell you who played the most snaps at running back for each of the teams. You can also find that on my Instagram page as well. If you want to get into a draw for 20 DK bucks, smash the like button for the episode, leave your DraftKings handle in the comments section, tell me your favorite waiver wire pickup for the week. If Devonta Freeman's out for a while, Brian Hill's the guy. If not, for right now, JD McKissic is probably my preference because of his pass catching prowess and a bad quarterback if Stafford has to miss some time. But if anyone gets signed to the Lions, then it's probably not going to be great. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.